15 years of my life were contained in the cold glass walls of this conference room, a room I designed. Across the table. My husband Mark tapped his fingers impatiently, but my eyes were fixed on the official company portrait behind him. It was the same photo from our grand opening, with one small cruel addition, a cheap sticker of a broken heart placed perfectly over my smiling face. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a deliberate erasure of my existence from the world we built together. Before we jump into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach and connect with amazing viewers like you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next surprising turn in our journey. Now, get comfortable and let's dive into a tale that will leave you inspired and intrigued. My name is Leah Vance, and for 15 years, my entire world was contained within the cool, glass walls of a conference room I had designed myself. I sat at the head of a solid oak table I had chosen, in a chair I had sketched from a memory of a Danish museum, looking at the man I had built a life and a business with. The polished surface reflected a distorted version of my face, a fitting metaphor for how I felt. The air hummed with the low, almost subliminal frequency of the climate control system I had specified, a sound I had once found soothing, the gentle breath of a living building. Now, it felt like a monotonous, oppressive drone, counting down the seconds until my formal severance from my own creation. I could still remember the beginning with painful clarity, as if it were a film playing on a loop in my mind. We were in our tiny, cramped apartment, the air thick with the smell of cheap coffee and ambition. We had blueprints spread across the kitchen table, and Mark was tracing the lines I had drawn, his eyes alive with an excitement that matched my own. "This is it, Leah," he had whispered, his voice full of a genuine awe I hadn't heard in over a decade. "This is the design that will launch us." He was right. That design, for the first Callaway Tower, with its radical cantilevered gardens, won us the contract that put Vance and Sterling on the map. We celebrated with a cheap bottle of champagne on our rusty fire escape, watching the city lights and feeling like we own the world. That shared dream, that feeling of infinite possibility, felt like it belonged to another lifetime, to two other people. I remembered another time. Years later, when the cracks began to show, I had proposed a radical, sustainable design for a community library, one that prioritized natural light, reclaimed materials, and green space over raw, profitable square footage. Mark had looked at my sketches, his brow furrowed not with excitement, but with annoyance. "It's beautiful, Leah, but it's not practical," he'd said, his new favorite word. "The client wants maximum floor space for minimum cost. Your vision is an expensive luxury." We argued for a week. My pleas for art and soul met with his cold spreadsheets and profit margins. In the end, a compromised, blander version was built. He called it a business success at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. I saw it as the first of many small deaths for the artistic soul of our firm. The slow, grinding force of his pragmatism had eroded our shared foundation, long before another woman ever entered the picture. Across the polished oak table now, my husband, Mark Sterling, tapped his fingers impatiently. Beside him sat Sophia, her presence a sharp, painful note in the symphony of my life's collapse. She subtly placed a hand on Mark's arm, a gesture of ownership. "Mark and I were just reviewing the schematics for the new waterfront project," she said, her voice bright and pointedly cheerful, directed at me. "We're incorporating that biophilic integration concept you were so fond of. It's really resonating with the new investors." She was using my own design language, my signature philosophy, presenting it as her own discovery. She wasn't just replacing me in my home, she was actively, and clumsily, trying to overwrite my professional legacy. I had checked the company website that morning. My biography page was gone, replaced by a generic 404 not found. My name had been scrubbed from the project descriptions, each one now credited to the visionary leadership of Mark Sterling and the Sterling Designs creative team. My gaze drifted past them, to the main office wall where our official company portrait hung. It was the same photo from our grand opening, but now it had one small, cruel addition, a cheap, childish sticker of a broken heart placed perfectly over my smiling face. It was a petty act of vandalism, but it was also a brutally effective symbol. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a deliberate, meticulous erasure. The final meeting was supposed to be a formality. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. As our lawyers prepared the final documents, Mark cleared his throat. "There is one more thing," he said. My lawyer, a kind, weary woman named Helen, looked up in surprise. Mark leaned forward. "I want to formally request the return of certain creative assets that I invested in for Leah and the children during our marriage. They are, for all intents and purposes, property of the company." The room went still. Helen spoke first, her voice tight with disbelief. "Mark, we've already settled all marital assets. The term creative assets in this context is ambiguous and, frankly, unprecedented. Personal gifts are not subject to division." "These weren't just gifts, Helen," Mark countered. He slid a neatly typed list across the table. His lawyer, a sharp man named Preston, chimed in smoothly. "The items in question were either purchased with corporate funds, claimed as business expenses, or directly contributed to the generation of company revenue. They are legally classifiable as corporate assets." Helen put on her reading glasses and scanned the list, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. "You want her workstation computer, Mark. It's 6 years old. You want her library of design books." "And claimed as business expenses over a decade," Preston recited coolly, as if reading from a script. "The framed blueprint of your own home," Helen said, her voice rising. "This is a personal document. The design incorporates structural elements and aesthetic motifs later used in the award-winning Vance residential style, making it a foundational piece of company intellectual property." Preston replied without blinking. My eyes followed the list, the physical architectural awards, and then the item that made the air leave my lungs. All personal design journals, 15 years. My private journals, my sanctuary of raw ideas, half-formed sketches, and personal notes. He was demanding my very thought process. And then the list turned to the children, the professional-grade 3D printer, and the final item, the foundation stone. "This is a transparent attempt to intimidate your client," Helen said, her voice shaking with controlled anger. "It's psychological abuse disguised as a legal claim. The journals are her private thoughts. We will fight this, and we will win." But I was frozen. I saw the faint, satisfied smile on Sophia's lips. He wasn't just erasing me from the portrait. He was digging up the very foundation of our life to prove it was never mine to begin with. "Leah, don't," Helen murmured, but I found my voice. "It's all right, Helen." I looked directly at Mark. "He can have it all," I said, my voice steady. "I'll return everything." That night, the house was cavernous in its silence. The children were asleep. I sat in the dark, my cell phone in my hand, my thumb hovering over my mother's contact number. I wanted to call her, to unload the sheer, unbelievable cruelty of the day, to hear her voice tell me everything would be okay. But I stopped. Explaining it would mean giving it more power, more life. It would mean letting Mark's toxicity seep into the lives of the people I loved. This was my battle. My dignity demanded that I face it alone. I put the phone down and made myself a cup of tea, my hands shaking slightly. The next morning, I called Helen. Leah, I was up all night reviewing case law, she said, her voice urgent. His claim is tenuous at best. We can file an injunction. I'm not changing my mind. Helen, I said quietly. I'm not breaking. I'm letting go of the weight. All those things, they're just anchors to a past he has poisoned. He thinks he's taking my power, but he's just taking things. This isn't a surrender. It's a strategic retreat. I need a clean slate. The week that followed was a quiet exercise in dismantling a life. I started with the journals. I held the oldest one, its leather cover worn smooth. I opened it to a random page. There was a rough sketch of a staircase that would eventually become a signature feature in one of our buildings. Beside it, in the margin, was a tiny, clumsy drawing of a flower and the note Leo. Age 4 brought me this from the garden. His hands were so muddy. My work and my life, my love and my labor, all intertwined on the same page. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, then closed the book and placed it gently in a box, sealing away 15 years of my inner world. The awards were next. I remembered the night we won the National Design Prize. On stage, Mark had thanked my brilliant partner and wife, the soul of our firm. Later that night, in the hotel room, he had complained that my acceptance speech was a little too academic, and that I should have focused more on the commercial success. I took them down from the shelves, my name etched in metal, a testament to a partnership that had been a lie for longer than I knew. The hardest part was the children's rooms. I stood at the doorway to Leo's room. He was a creator, like me. On his shelves were dozens of intricate models he had printed. I began the process of disassembling the printer. Later that afternoon, the children came home. They stopped short in the living room, their eyes wide. "Are we moving?" "Mom?" Maya asked. I knelt, pulling them close. "No, sweetie, these are just some things that Dad asked for back." Leo's brow furrowed. "What things?" I took a deep breath. "The books, the awards, and your 3D printer. Leo." Leo stiffened. "But Dad said that was for me, for my future." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a logic that wasn't there. "The custom print files on the computer are mine. I designed them. That's my intellectual property. Right like you taught me. He can't take my ideas." My heart broke. He was his mother's son. "You are absolutely right, Leo. Your ideas are yours and they are brilliant. But the machine, he's asking for the machine back. Sometimes the law and what is right are two different things." "Why?" Maya asked, her innocent question cutting deeper than any legal argument. "If he gave it to us, why does he want to take it away?" I found her later in her room, trying to hide a small 3D printed music box that Leo had made for her. "So Daddy can't find it," she whispered, her lip trembling. "Oh, honey," I said, pulling her into a hug. "He's not taking that. That was a gift from your brother. That's different." I looked at my children, at the fear and confusion in their eyes, and my resolve hardened. "Sometimes," I told them, "people who are hurting try to take things because it makes them feel powerful. It has nothing to do with you. It's about their own emptiness." Leo looked down, his fists clenched. I hugged them tighter. "He can take things," I said, "but he can never take us." The last item was the foundation stone. As I tipped it, I heard a faint rattle, a tiny click, and a small, almost invisible panel on the underside shifted, a hidden compartment. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a tiny flash drive. A small label was affixed to it. M. I slipped it into my pocket, my mind racing. This changed everything. The day of the return. I drove to the gleaming downtown office. The city skyline was a gallery of my work, buildings I had poured my soul into. They were a part of me that he could never pack into a box. The receptionist, Carol, gave me a small, pained smile. "It's good to see you, Leah," she said softly. "We miss you here. It's not the same." It was a quiet act of loyalty that warmed me. Sophia was waiting in the lobby. "Mark is in a meeting, but he asked me to receive the items." I said nothing, simply beginning the task of bringing the boxes in. When I finally wheeled the foundation stone in, she ran a manicured finger over the logo. "It's good to have this back where it belongs," she said. "You know, you're right," I said. "Everything should be where it belongs. But I think you forgot something." I pulled out the tiny flash drive. Mark emerged from his office at that exact moment. He stopped dead. "What is that?" he demanded. "I found it tucked away inside the foundation stone," I said. "I had my lawyer's forensic team make a copy. It seems to contain detailed records of several offshore shell corporations, Sterling Holdings, Apex Global, along with undeclared income and two entirely different sets of company ledgers. It suggests that the company's stated value is fundamentally fraudulent." Mark tried to bluff. "That's nothing, an old backup." "Is it?" I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. "Because it details specific wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands that coincide perfectly with the bonuses you claimed the firm couldn't afford to pay our staff last year. I imagine your investors, not to mention the Internal Revenue Service, would be very interested in that discrepancy." The mask of the powerful CEO shattered. "Fear, pure, primal fear." Sophia turned to him, her voice a sharp whisper. "Mark, what is she talking about?" I placed the flash drive gently on top of the marble stone. "My lawyer will be in touch. Mark, the discovery of this information materially changes the entire context of our divorce proceedings. Any settlement not based on the true financial reality of this company is void." I turned and walked out, leaving them in the wreckage of the truth. The next few days were a masterclass in legal maneuvering. Helen was magnificent. I listened in on a conference call where Preston, Mark's lawyer, blustered about extortion. Helen's voice was ice. "Mr. Preston, this isn't extortion. It is a fiduciary duty. My client, as a co-founder and still legal partner, has discovered evidence of significant financial crimes. We can either renegotiate a private settlement that reflects the millions in hidden assets, or my client can fulfill her legal obligation to report these felonies to the authorities, which would trigger a federal investigation and dissolve your client's corporate charter. The choice is his." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. A week later, a new settlement was signed. It was ironclad. I told the children that evening. "So, I get to keep the printer?" Leo asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Yes, and Dad won't be asking for anything back ever again." The relief in their eyes was the only victory I needed. The day Mark's public statement was published, my phone began to ring. Old colleagues, former clients, one of them, a respected developer named Arthur, took me to lunch. "We always knew that was your work, Leah," he said, stirring his iced tea. "Mark's a great salesman, but you're the architect. Everyone in the industry knew. We were just waiting for you to be free." A month later, I stood in a small, rented studio space with a massive window that flooded the room with light. The smell of fresh paint was the smell of a new beginning. My phone rang. It was Arthur. "Leah," he said, "I have a new project, a community arts center. The board wants a building with a soul. I told them I only knew one person for the job. What's your vision?" I looked around my empty studio, at the infinite possibility of it. "My vision," I said, a real smile in my voice, is to build honest, beautiful things that last. The studio slowly came to life. Helen stopped by with a bottle of the most expensive champagne I had ever seen. "To new foundations," she toasted. My first contract was signed on my new drafting table. I named my new firm, simply, Vance Architecture. I unrolled a large, clean sheet of paper on my drafting table. It was the first page of my first solo project. In the bottom corner of the page, I drew a small, dedicated box. "Leo and Maya's Corner," I wrote. They rushed over, their faces bright, and began to fill the space with their own imaginative scribbles, their own small acts of creation, as the first line of a new design took shape, a true and lasting foundation being laid. I realized that the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's the quiet, resilient, unshakable act of building something better for yourself, on your own terms, with the people you love. It's a profound truth that our greatest strength is often forged in the moments we are forced to let go. We come to understand that what people can take from us, the objects, the titles, the shared histories, were never the source of our true worth. Our real foundation is not something that can be packed into a box or reclaimed in a contract. It is the creativity, the resilience, and the quiet dignity that remain after everything else has been stripped away. The most powerful response to having your world dismantled is not to fight over the ruins, but to pick up a new set of tools and build a new world, one that is stronger, more authentic, and entirely your own. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. Every life has its own story of rebuilding, and we would be honored to hear a piece of yours. Share your thoughts on resilience and new beginnings in the comments below. To ensure you never miss another story that empowers and inspires, please subscribe to our channel and become part of our growing community.